Welcome to Manna-fest, hosted by international evangelist, teacher, and author Perry Stone. On today's program, you will experience a powerful right now word that will change your life forever. Enjoy unique insight into prophetic and practical truth as Perry ministers using biblical word studies, ancient Jewish history, and Hebrew customs that will cause the Scriptures to come alive as never before. It's time to feast on fresh manna, so get ready to be blessed and encouraged. And now, here is your host and teacher, Perry Stone.
In all the preaching that is being done around the world, especially in North America, I'm observing something, that there are two time periods that very few people ever hear taught about. And I want to explain to you what those two time periods are. One is the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. If I were to take a survey, and I'm not going to do it, with all the people here, which are about 300 people, and I were to say, how many of you have ever heard a pastor stand up and say, I'm going to teach what's going to happen during the 1,000-year reign? Let's just do that. How many of you have ever heard an entire message on the millennial reign of Jesus? Raise your hand. 15 people out of 300? Wait a minute. If we're going there, how come we're not talking about it? Come on. Now, here's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the 8th millennium. I'm going to talk about life in the 8th millennium, because here's something you never hear taught on. What happens at the end of the 1,000 years? Where do we go from there? What is it all about? Now, before I begin today, let me just welcome our Manna-fest audience around the world, and also those that are with us in Israel here, our tour group. This is tour group. There's your signal. There's your signal. In the Bible, their biblical numbers have a definite meaning. 6, of course, is the number of man. 7 is the number of perfection and completion. And I shared something the other day that I want to repeat here on the program. When you get to the number 8, 8 is always a number of new beginnings. There were 8 souls in the ark that repopulated the earth after the flood. A Jewish child was circumcised on the 8th day, introducing him into his beginning of his covenant with God. Also, there were 8 steps that go up into the millennial temple, where we will worship the Lord one day when He returns and sets up His kingdom. The Bible tells us that after 8 days, Jesus was transfigured. And notice, after that period of time, and also after 8 days, Jesus appeared to His disciples. And when He was appeared to Mary, 8 days passed, and He then appears to Thomas. 8 is always connected to a number of new beginnings. Now, what I'd like to do for a moment is share with you some of the early church fathers' theories. We're not going to take the time to tell who they were and when they lived and all that. But there was a theory that started developing right after the ascension of Christ, and it was called the 6 days of creation and the 6,000-year theory. Most of you have heard this. And that is that as there were 6 days of creation, each day represents 1,000 years, because the Bible says one day with the Lord is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is one day. Then on the 7th day, God rested. Now, I heard a comedian, I don't think he's very funny, to be honest with you, but he was on television. He's an agnostic, and he said, yeah, these crazy Christians, can you believe these idiots don't believe in evolution? Sir, you may have come from a monkey, but I didn't. Okay? But let me say this, and the second thing he said is, believing in a God that gets so tired He has to rest after His creation. That's not what the Bible says. The reason God rested on the 7th day, sir, He had already created everything and wasn't nothing else to create. And the reason He's resting on the 7th day is He's back looking at everything He did and bragging on it. It's all good. And the third reason He rested on the 7th day was because He's giving a pattern of what His children are to do. Exodus says you work 6 days, the 7th day you don't work. 6 years of work, 7th year. I better not say that to my staff. I get in trouble saying that. 6 years of work, 7th year you don't work. But it was an agriculture society. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but follow me carefully. Now, when we talk about the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ, here's how it works. The early fathers, many of them believed that there'd be 6,000 years of man's government from Adam all the way to the time when Jesus would set up His kingdom on earth. 6,000 years or 6 days. Now, we don't know, do you start timing it from the creation of Adam? Do you start timing it at the fall in the garden? We don't know when that was. Do you start timing it when Adam is 130 years of age and he has his first son born outside of Cain and Abel? He has the replacement born, Seth. Do you start timing it there? So no one can figure out when is the 6,000 years. But however, in the book of Revelation chapter 20, there's about 6 times it mentions the word they shall rule and reign with Christ for 1,000 years. Now, this 1,000 years is recognized by many of the fathers. There are people who don't believe in it, don't believe it's going to happen, but I'd rather trust the Bible than them. And in this 1,000 years, it actually can be identified, now watch the phrase, all through the Bible as the day of the Lord. I don't know if you've noticed how many times in the Bible, the Old Testament, talks about the day of the Lord is at hand, the day of the Lord. Now, I got very, I won't say confused, but I was just concerned when I would read one prophet, and the day of the Lord was great and wonderful, and the lion lays down beside the lamb, and the child can play with the snake, and the snake's not going to bite it. Talk about a snake handler. Snake handling's coming, folks. No, not really, not really. But it says that the child will play in the den of a cockatrice or a serpent, and he won't be afraid of it. In other words, there'll be no fear of the animal kingdom, is what he's saying there. And, you know, I start reading things like that, and then I'll turn right around and read another prophet talking about the day of the Lord. It says, it's a day of judgment, it's a day of gloom, it's a day of destruction. And I'm saying, okay, this is why people criticize the Bible and say it contradicts itself, because one guy says this, one guy says that. And I said, Lord, what are you talking about? Now, I want you to listen to this. The day of the Lord, one day with the Lord is, 1,000 years is, there is one day time when Armageddon happens, that unless Jesus comes back and returns, no flesh will be saved. The Armageddon armies are marching to Jerusalem. The blood is up to the horse's bridle. That's in one day. In a 24-hour period, all that happens. But watch this. In a 24-hour period, while that's going on, Jesus comes back with the armies of heaven, Revelation 19. Jesus steps foot on the Mount of Olives, Zechariah 14. Satan is bound by an angel of God in the book of Revelation. And it all happens, ready, in a day. The day of the Lord. So on one hand, the day of the Lord's terrible. On the other hand, the day of the Lord's great because deliverance has come. Do you see what I'm saying? Then the day of the Lord is 1,000 years. Now, in Paul's writing in the book of Hebrews, you will find over and over again where he talks about entering into rest. And he compares the children of Israel. And he says the children of Israel, because of their unbelief, could not enter into rest. I believe, and I'm trying to go from memory here, but I believe the word rest is used by Paul approximately 11 times, comparing Israel's unbelief, not being able to enter the promised land, and how he warns believers to be careful not to fall into unbelief lest they fall short of God's blessing. In the 11 times that Paul talks about rest, he uses a specific word that means to recline, to rest, or to relax. One time, in fact, I think I have this here somewhere. One time in Hebrews chapter 4 and 9, he uses the word rest, and it's the Greek word sabbaton. And that is, ready, the great Sabbath. Now, all these other times, he's talking about just resting and relaxing and entering into God's presence. But then he talks there, lest you have an evil heart of unbelief where you cannot enter into your, watch this, eternal rest. What is the eternal rest? It is known by Jews as the great Sabbath. So in other words, Paul warned the church, be careful that you fall back into unbelief and you're not accounted worthy to enter into what? That great rest, which means to rule and reign with Christ during that time frame when we're all together in our eternal rest. Doesn't mean the grave, by the way. All right? Now, having said that, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the one. How many of you would like to hear me sometime teach on the 1,000-year reign? You know? We may do that at a conference. We'll lay out maps. We'll show you how big Jerusalem will be. We'll show you where the farming area will be. We'll show you where we'll be living, and that would be an interesting teaching. But here's the part I want to get to. At the conclusion of the 1,000-year reign of Christ, the Bible tells us a couple things are going to happen, and this is what I want to make clear to you, and I'm going to do this kind of from memory and kind of put some things together if I can. We find out that there's 2 judgments that take place in heaven. The first judgment is found in Revelation chapter 11, right at the end of the verse 18. And John says that he's in heaven, he sees the temple of God open in heaven, he sees the Ark of the Covenant, and it says, now has come the time to judge the prophets and the saints and those who fear your name. And that judgment there is identified as what we call in English the judgment seat of Christ, or the Bible identifies it. And the Greek word there is bema. The bema was